when Jen ran for Congress against Wasserman Schultz, who's one of the most entrenched representatives in the United States, most people would probably acknowledge that as much. One of the things that we noticed is how the tentacles run very deep, especially within the county. Broward County has a notorious reputation politically at the national level, which is kind of amazing. But the things that we notice in terms of, where labor stands, even though Debbie is completely anti-labor, her votes speak for themselves, especially regarding the anti-worker trading, trade agreements that she supports. And so what I would like to know, I think, Jen, you would agree, is how does it work on the GOP side where you are? Because even though most people think that Madison is a disaster, probably akin to the same level as somebody like a Wasserman Schultz, people are still going to get in line, I guess is the question.
He's not as entrenched as she is, though.
Well, no, he's not. He's a
enough to be that entrenched. But yeah, talk a little bit about what it's been like there locally with like labor and with you versus
just like people in the GOP in general, what that's like, and who has been receptive, and frankly, who are the people who are just they're not going to rock the boat kind of thing.
Yeah, so it's hard to tell who won't rock the boat because typically those people aren't going to speak up. I would say out of the people that show up at this point, as Cawthorn has created a situation where he's making us look very bad. We are very proud people of our mountain values, and that typically goes back to Christian values, but just down to earth, very morally sound. And when you have somebody who's going around talking about orgies and cocaine, it becomes an embarrassment. And so I would say the establishment GOP is quite sick of it here. And they're going to rally around someone who is more of someone like you had to go up against, who has been there for a long time. And which is, we have a senator here who's also running, state senator who's running for the congressional seat. And so, you've got a lot of the Cawthorn votes are going to go swing towards that more establishment, more same ideas, still pushing the same rhetoric, just in a polished, non-embarrassing way. And so it's more just the go along to get along, and I'm just not willing to do that. So I'm getting more of the moderate or fed up Republicans. A lot of them have already switched to unaffiliated over the last 5 to 7 years, just because of what's been going on. And because that's our largest voting bloc now, an unaffiliated electorate could change the partisan politics, or at least some outcomes. And that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
What are the voting rules for the primary? Is it same day voter registration? You could switch your affiliation the day of election.
No, I just put it up.
April 22nd is the last day to change your voter registration. And an unaffiliated voter, it's an open primary in that they can show up on that day and pick a Democratic ticket or a Republican ticket.
Okay, yeah. But a Democrat can't switch to Republican.
No, and vice versa. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
That's a semi-open primary, and I think that's one that, frankly, is probably the best option, especially if people prefer to be independent, which, frankly, that's where the majority of the country is now.
Yeah, and so I try to explain, and you already mentioned this. with an R+10, you're not going to switch it to blue, no matter how hard you try right now, and. I'm not saying that to discourage the other side from, championing their person. It's just the reality. If you take away unaffiliated voters, there's just still more Republicans than there are Democrats. And so, that's just the way it is. We did about 2 or 3 weeks ago, this district went above the unaffiliated took over as the number one party, unaffiliation. And so, this is a real doable thing for this voting bloc to really have a say. And I love it because if you're a political scientist, they're pulling these extremes back. It's like, hey, if we can change the outcome of an election, then both sides need to rein their policy views and their rhetoric in. And so that would be a nice change.
And before we go, what are your key issues that you're focusing on policy wise? What are the things that are most important or that you think most differentiate you from the incumbent at this point?
Well, a lot does. But the biggest thing for me, and I'll try to wrap it up into a nice little package here, is strengthening the middle class, because that's how you strengthen democracy. And so if you've ever seen democracies fall in other countries, they thin out and get rid of the middle class and then utilize the military to take over the impoverished. And so strengthening the middle class means we have to diversify our industries a little bit more, bring those industries into rural areas. I think we can do that by changing the minimum wage for federal minimum wage to being a variable minimum wage. And what that means is you go based off the cost of living indexes that already exist.
Living wage. Yeah.
Wage. The living wage.
Yeah. That's one of the terms being used. And so it's based on the housing market for that area. And then we use HUD, Section 3 specifically, that gives tax incentives to these companies who build in rural areas to invest in that workforce housing around those areas. And so in doing that, their payroll will be a little less because it's a rural area. So the cost of living is lower. And so you create this interwoven mechanism to tie wages, jobs, and housing all together. And then, they kind of self-regulate because nobody's going to want the housing market to go up because then the wages go up, right? And your payroll expense goes up. And so, I think that's one way to really, and it cuts down on rural resentment, which is real. And so, it'll help my district, which is, I would say 13 out of the 15 counties is extremely rural, and they have a really hard time. The other thing would be broadband, because you're not going to get those companies. You're not going to get those companies to go anywhere out in rural areas if you can't get them access to the internet, and good access to the internet. So,
yeah, that was definitely I'm very direct about what I thought. Trump did well as president. Axing the TPP was the number one thing, in my opinion. One of the worst things he did was put a GPI in charge of the FEC. And of course, universal broadband is something that everybody needs. This is a nonpartisan issue. There is nothing partisan about it whatsoever. That unfortunately was made that way.
Yeah, we have to redefine broadband at the government's level in order to make it fit into all the forms of money we could put towards it. It really needs to be redefined at all levels of government so that we can get the money we need towards that infrastructure.
In regards to, we obviously addressed all of these major issues, but I think you really hit a lot of things right on the head in terms of where we really see a lot of things in common. If somebody's being paid a living wage, then you're really not, you're not going to be dealing with the welfare issue, for example. And the other thing that you brought up regarding how we're able to bring these people together from when you specifically said bringing jobs to more rural areas, that's essentially decentralization of the economy. I agree with that 100%. I think centralizing the economy is way too much of a problem. And that's a huge common ground issue I think we can agree on.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.